TED Talks are recorded live at the TED Conference and produced with WNYC New York Public Radio. This episode features Aubrey DeGrey, biomedical gerontologist and innovative thinker on aging. TED Talks are made possible through the support of BMW, where ideas are everything. Here's Aubrey DeGrey.
Right, thank you. I'm going to talk about 5 different things. I'm going to talk about why defeating aging is desirable. I'm going to talk about why we have to get our shit together and actually talk about this a bit more than we do, and think about it more. I'm going to talk about feasibility as well, of course. I'm going to talk about why we are so fatalistic about doing anything about aging. And then I'm going to spend perhaps the second half of the talk talking about how we might actually be able to prove that our fatalism is wrong, namely by actually doing something about it. I'm going to do that in 2 steps. The first one I'm going to talk about is how to get from a relatively modest amount of life extension, which I'm going to define as 30 years, applied to people who are already in middle age when you start, to a point which can genuinely be called defeating aging, namely essentially an elimination of the relationship between how old you are and how likely you are to die in the next year. Or indeed to get sick in the first place. And of course the last thing I'm going to talk about is how to reach that intermediate step, that point of maybe 30 years life extension. So I'm going to start with why we should. Now I want to ask a question. Hands up, anyone in the audience who is in favor of malaria? That was easy. Okay, hands up anyone in the audience who's not sure whether malaria is a good thing or a bad thing. Okay, so we all think malaria is a bad thing. That's very good news, because I thought that was what the answer would be. Now, the thing is, I would like to put it to you that the main reason why we think that malaria is a bad thing is because of a characteristic of malaria that it shares with aging. And here is that characteristic. The only real difference is that aging kills considerably more people than malaria does. So really, this is how I like to describe it. It's a global trance. These are the sorts of unbelievable excuses that people give for aging. And I'm not actually saying that these excuses are completely valueless. There are some good points to be made here, things that we ought to be thinking about, forward planning, so that nothing goes so that we minimize the turbulence when we actually figure out how to fix aging. But the question is, are they so dangerous, these risks of doing something about aging, that they outweigh the downside of doing the opposite, namely leaving aging as it is? Are these so bad that they outweigh condemning 100,000 people a day to an unnecessarily early death? If you haven't got an argument that's that strong, then just don't waste my time, is what I say. Now, there is one argument that some people do think really is that strong, and here it is. People worry about overpopulation. They say, well, if we fix aging, no one's going to die to speak of, or at least the death toll is going to be much lower, only from crossing St. Giles carelessly. And therefore, we're not going to be able to have many kids, and kids are really important to most people. And that's true. I think it's true that we will face a dilemma in this respect. We will have to decide whether to have a low birth rate or a high death rate. The high death rate will, of course, arise from simply rejecting these therapies and in favor of carrying on having a lot of kids. And I say that that's fine. The future of humanity is entitled to make that choice. What's not fine is for us to make that choice on behalf of the future. If we vacillate and hesitate and do not actually develop these therapies, then we are condemning a whole cohort of people who would have been young enough and healthy enough to benefit from those therapies, but will not be because we haven't developed them as quickly as we could. We will be denying those people an indefinite lifespan, and I consider that is immoral. That's my answer to the overpopulation question. So that's all I'm going to say about that. I'm now going to talk about feasibility. And the fundamental reason, I think, why we feel that aging is inevitable is summed up in a definition of aging that I'm giving here. A very simple definition. Aging is a side effect of being alive in the first place. Aging is basically a process that happens to inanimate objects like cars, and it also happens to us, despite the fact that we have a lot of clever self-repair mechanisms, because those self-repair mechanisms are not perfect. So basically metabolism, which is defined as basically everything that keeps us alive from one day to the next, has side effects. Those side effects accumulate and eventually cause pathology. And there are really 2 games in town, according to most people, with regard to postponing aging. What I'm calling here the gerontology approach and the geriatrics approach. The geriatrician will intervene late in the day when pathology is becoming evident, and the geriatrician will try and hold back the sands of time and stop the accumulation of side effects from causing the pathology quite so soon. Of course, it's a very short-termist strategy. It's a losing battle because the things that are causing the pathology are becoming more abundant as time goes on. The gerontology approach looks much more promising on the surface because it's, prevention is better than cure. But unfortunately, the thing is that we don't understand metabolism very well. In fact, we have a pitifully poor understanding of how organisms work. Even cells we're not really too good on yet. So basically, gerontology is a fine approach in the end, but it is not an approach whose time has come when we're talking about intervention. So then, what do we do about that? Just suppose, as I said, that we do acquire the ability to confer 30 extra years of healthy life on people who are already in middle age, let's say 55. I'm going to call that robust human rejuvenation, okay? What would that actually mean for how long people of various ages today, or equivalently of various ages at the time that these therapies arrive, would actually live? In order to answer that question, you might think it's simple, but it's not simple. We can't just say, well, if they're young enough to benefit from these therapies, then they'll live 30 years longer. That's the wrong answer. And the reason it's the wrong answer is because of progress. There are two sorts of technological progress, really, for this purpose. There are fundamental major breakthroughs, and there are incremental refinements of those breakthroughs. Now, they differ a great deal in terms of the predictability of time frames. Fundamental breakthroughs, very hard to predict how long it's going to take to make a fundamental breakthrough. It was a very long time ago that we decided that flying would be fun, and it took us until 1903 to actually work out how to do it. So I think that, in fact, the people who are young enough to benefit from these first therapies that give this moderate amount of life extension, even though those people are already middle-aged when the therapies arrive, will be at some sort of cusp. They will mostly survive long enough to receive improved treatments that will give them a further 30 or maybe 50 years. In other words, they will be staying ahead of the game. The therapies will be improving faster than the remaining imperfections in the therapies are catching up with us. This is a very important point for me to get across because, most people, when they hear that I predict that a lot of people alive today are going to live to 1,000 or more, they think that I'm saying that we're going to invent therapies in the next few decades that are so thoroughly eliminating aging that those therapies will let us live to 1,000 or more. I'm not saying that at all. I'm saying that the rate of improvement of those therapies will be enough. They'll never be perfect, but we'll be able to fix the things that 200-year-olds die of before we have any 200-year-olds, and the same for 300 and 400 and so on. I've decided to give this a little name, which is longevity escape velocity, and it seems to get the point across. If you're already 100 or even if you're 80, we probably can't do a lot for you with these therapies because you're too close to death's door for the really initial experimental therapies to be good enough for you. You won't be able to withstand them. But if you're only 50, then there's a chance that you might be able to pull out of the dive and, eventually get through this and start becoming biologically younger in a meaningful sense in terms of your youthfulness, both physical and mental, and in terms of your risk of death from age-related causes. And of course, if you're a bit younger than that, then you're never even going to get near to being fragile enough to die of age-related causes. So this is a genuine conclusion that I come to, that the first 150-year-old, we don't know how old that person is today because we don't know how long it's going to take to get these first-generation therapies. But irrespective of that age, I'm claiming that the first person to live to 1,000, subject, of course, to global catastrophes, is actually probably only about 10 years younger than the first 150-year-old, and that's quite a thought. All right, so finally I'm going to spend the rest of the talk on step one, namely how do we actually get to this moderate amount of life extension that will allow us to get to escape velocity. And in order to do that, I need to talk about mice. And this is what it is. I say we're going to take a long-lived strain of mouse, which basically means mice that live about 3 years on average. We do exactly nothing to them until they're already 2 years old, and then we do a whole bunch of stuff to them, and with those therapies we get them to live on average to their 5th birthday. The question then is, what would that actually mean for the time frame until we get to the milestone I talked about earlier for humans, which we can now, as I've explained, equivalently call either robust human rejuvenation or longevity escape velocity? Secondly, what does it mean for the public's perception of how long it's going to take for us to get to those things, starting from the time we get the mice? And thirdly, the question is, what will it do to actually how much people want it? And it seems to me that the first question is entirely a biology question, and it's extremely hard to answer. One has to be very speculative, and many of my colleagues would say that we should not do this speculation, that we should simply keep our counsel until we know more. I say that's nonsense. I say we absolutely are irresponsible if we stay silent on this. We need to give our best guess as to the time frames in order to give people a sense of proportion so that they can assess their priorities. So I say that we have a 50-50 chance of reaching this RHR milestone, robust human rejuvenation, within 15 years from the point that we get to robust mouse rejuvenation. 15 years from the robust mouse. The public's perception will probably be somewhat better than that. The public tend to underestimate how difficult scientific things are, so they'll probably think it's 5 years away. They'll be wrong, but that actually won't matter too much. And finally, of course, I think it's fair to say that a large part of the reason why the public is so ambivalent about aging now is the global chance I spoke about earlier, the coping strategy. That will be history at this point because it will no longer be possible to believe that aging is inevitable in humans since it's been postponed so very effectively in mice. So we're likely to end up with a very strong change in people's attitudes, and of course that has enormous implications. So in order to tell you now how we're going to get these mice, I'm going to add a little bit to my description of aging. I'm going to use this word damage to denote these intermediate things that are caused by metabolism and that eventually cause pathology. Because the critical thing about this is that even though the damage only eventually causes pathology, the damage itself is caused ongoingly throughout life, starting before we're born. But it is not part of metabolism itself. And this turns out to be useful because we can say that fundamentally the difference between gerontology and geriatrics is that gerontology tries to inhibit the rate at which metabolism lays down this damage, and geriatricians try to hold back the sands of time by stopping the damage converting into pathology, and the reason it's a losing battle is because the damage is continuing to accumulate. So there's a third approach, if we look at it this way. We can call it the engineering approach, and I claim that the engineering approach is within range. The engineering approach does not intervene in any processes. It does not intervene in this process or this one. And that's good because it means that it's not a losing battle and it's something that we are within range of being able to do because it doesn't involve improving on evolution. The engineering approach simply says let's go in and periodically repair all of these various types of damage, not necessarily repair them completely, but repair them quite a lot so that we keep the level of damage down below the threshold that must exist that causes it to be pathogenic. We know that this threshold exists because we don't get age-related diseases until we're in middle age, even though the damage has been accumulating since before we were born. Why do I say that we're in range? Well, this is the list of types of things that qualify as damage, side effects of metabolism that cause pathology in the end, or that might cause pathology, and there are only 7 of them. Cell loss, mutations in chromosomes, mutations in the mitochondria, and so on. So these 7 things were all under discussion in gerontology a long time ago. And that is pretty good news, because it means that, we've come a long way in biology in these 20 years, so the fact that we haven't extended this list is pretty good indication that there's no extension to be done. However, it's better than that. We actually know how to fix them all, in mice, in principle. And what I mean by in principle is we probably can actually implement these fixes within a decade. Some of them are partially implemented already, the ones at the top. I haven't got time to go through them at all. But if we can, my conclusion is that if we can actually get suitable funding for this, then we can probably develop robust mouse rejuvenation in only 10 years, but we do need to get serious about it. We do need to really start trying. And I'll stop there. Thank you.
That was Aubrey DeGrey, recorded at TED Global in Oxford, England, July 2005. TED Talks are produced by WNYC New York Public Radio for TED. TED Talks are made possible through the support of BMW, where ideas are everything. For more information on TED, visit TED.com.